folks, JR, back for another episode of Fallen Badge. This episode will be the friendly fire death of Major Rufus Gates. It's November 4, 1994. Rufus Gates has taken his son and his nephew, and they're going to go watch a Whitehaven High School football game. Whitehaven had a real good football team. In fact, for years they've had a good football team. Now, Whitehaven High School is located on Elvis Presley, south of Shelby Drive. It's located in the old South Precinct. I believe I was working the Delta shift down at the South Precinct at that time, which Delta shift was 6P to 2A. Rufus Gates, he was a major with the Memphis Police Department. He was over in OCU. He'd spent a good many years over there. I remember on Sunday mornings when I would go into the McDonald's at Elvis Presley and Brownlee, and I would see him sitting at a table with his son and his nephew having breakfast. Rufus Gates was a really good man, and he sure was loved throughout the department. Now, I'm going to tell this story going by the official version, or the most official version I can find. And I'll probably mention the second story I heard, which is pretty similar to the one we're going to talk about. The facts as I know them are this. Major Gates and his nephew and his son, they're in his car. They're on a street called McClure, which runs along the south side of Whitehaven High School. It runs there by the football stadium and the baseball field. That's an east-west running road, and it intersects into Elvis Presley. Now, I'm not rightly for sure just exactly where the incident took place on that street, other than I know it was close to the football stadium. Now, according to the official story, Major Gates is involved in a minor traffic crash. Another vehicle struck his car. Now, I don't know if he was actually in his car driving or if they were parked there on McClure or what, but Major Gates talks to the other driver, the other vehicle. Now he comes back to his vehicle. He gets his service weapon. I believe at that time, I think we had just transitioned over to the Smith & Wesson 9mm. But he gets his pistol. He tells his son to call 911. And he tells his son to tell the police dispatcher that the driver of the car's got a gun. Now, Major Gates is in civilian clothes because he's running organized crime unit, so nobody over there wears a uniform. Now, a few minutes pass, and the first Memphis police officer makes the scene. Now, that officer, he's relatively new. I think he'd been on maybe a year or so. I was an FTO, so I had trained some of the guys out of his class. I had he had never rode with me, but I'd interacted with him some, and he was a good police officer, I thought. I thought he was well-spoken, he's intelligent, he's a hard worker. He seemed like he was squared away. Well, he makes the scene, and all he knows is that somebody's got a gun. That's what he's told. Now, the way the official story reads is that the driver of the other car tells the officer that Major Gates has got a gun, and then he just left the scene. So it makes you think that the driver that hit him pulled down the street a little further or something. Somehow or another, Major Gates, the driver of this other vehicle, and the police officer are not all together. So after that fella drives off, all the officer now knows is somebody called 911, somebody's got a gun, the driver of this vehicle told him who's got the gun. And Major Gates walks back up, or is approaching the officer, and he still has his pistol in his hand. Now, evidently, the police officer, the uniformed officer, South Precinct officer, is in his car or near his car. Now, according to this official version, the Major Gates never identified himself as a police officer, didn't have his badge out, credentials out, anything. Now, I have no record of whether the uniformed officer gave any verbal commands or not, but at some point, the officer fires multiple shots and hits Major Gates. Major Gates goes down. Other police make the scene. Obviously, on a shots fired, the officer needs help call. And then it's realized that the person that's been shot is Major Gates. Now, the other version of this story I heard is pretty similar to this one, in that allegedly Major Gates and his son and his nephew were at or near his car on McClure, west of Elvis Presley, watching a football game or getting ready to walk around. I don't know if they're actually going to go into the stadium or they were just going to sit out there and watch it from the roadway. And that there was some kind of a disturbance or a traffic crash near Major Gates. And Major Gates went to investigate and took his pistol. So either of the stories is virtually the same. In any event, Major Gates is laying there bleeding out. So they call for the life flight, the hospital unit. They bring the helicopter in. Now, the helicopter, I'm pretty sure it landed there in the outfield of the baseball stadium. If not, it would have been that field, I think, just east of the baseball field. I remember seeing some of the video on the news because I was off that night, and I remember Lieutenant Clemmer. He was one of the Charlie shift lieutenants, I think, Delta shift. Anyways, he had worked in OCU a long time, so he knew Major Gates pretty well. I just remember him walking as they're rushing that gurney to the helicopter. So they fly Major Gates down to the med, to the trauma center. And Major Gates lingers for 3 days. And then he dies on the the 7th in November. Now, I'd heard a story, and I don't know if it's true, but a story that was passed along to me is that Major Gates is being loaded onto the gurney and being carried over to be put on the helicopter. He's repeating several times that it was his fault. Now, just to clarify that point, when I'm saying that Major Gates is saying it's his fault, Major Gates is accepting blame for the shooting and being shot, that he walked up to the officer with his gun and the officer didn't know any better. Sometimes when I speak, I make things more confusing, but to the bitter end, Major Gates was being a hell of a guy. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. It didn't make anybody feel any better, because you certainly have no winner in a situation where you have a friendly fire incident. Now, the death of Major Gates led to some changes in policy regarding off-duty officers or plainclothes officers when they come in contact with uniformed officers. The officer that shot him, he caught a lot of flack from what I call the old heads, the officers that have been around a long time, the ones that knew Rufus Gates really well. They really were giving it to him. Now, I thought then, I still think to this day, that was unfair to do that to that officer. The officer had been trained, and he didn't know who Rufus Gates was. He was protecting himself. And I think the fact that he had killed what turned out to be a major with the Memphis Police Department, I think that alone is enough punishment for anybody to have to live with the rest of their life. Knowing you did your job, you did as you were trained to do, and just somehow or another it didn't quite turn out like you wanted it to. But that officer went through a bunch of grief that he sure didn't deserve. That's just my opinion. Because it's dark over there. Even if he knew Major Gates, which he didn't, I don't know if he would have recognized him for who he was. I knew Major Gates enough to know him by sight. That don't mean I would have recognized him. I can't say what I would have done. But that policy about plainclothes or off-duty officers meeting uniformed officers, the policy is basically this, is that the uniformed officer is in control of the scene. The plainclothes or off-duty officer must follow all commands given by the uniformed officer. If uniformed officers are telling you to put the gun down or lay on the ground, you follow their direction. And that's easier said than done, obviously, in the heat of the moment. But that's what the policy basically is. Now, across the country, I think every year you'll get 2 or 3 police officers killed in a similar manner to this. And I believe Rufus Gates is the highest ranking member of the Memphis Police Department to ever be killed in what I consider a line of duty death. Rufus Gates had 17 years on the job at the time he was murdered. Let me back that up. I should not say murdered. He was a victim of a justifiable homicide, in my opinion. And it's just sad all the way around. Major Rufus Gates, end of watch, November 7th, 1994.